You know, you might not be familiar with the website Odysee, but pretty much every white supremacist from Alabama to New Hampshire and around the world is. There's similarities to YouTube, but a YouTube designed for the content creators who've been permanently banned from virtually every social media platform. And new reporting from GBH News attempts to peel back the curtain on how local funding keeps this vile operation running, or at least getting it started. With us at the library, GBH senior investigative reporter Philip Barton. Philip, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Reporter Tim Biba is a graduate student at Harvard Extension School. Good to meet you, Tim. And also with us on Zoom, Deputy Director for Data Analytics and Open Source Intelligence at the Southern Poverty Law Center and the authority on how online platforms like Odysee fester, Megan Squire. Megan, we're really thrilled to have you. Megan, Philip, Tim, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, Philip, before we get into all the specifics, fill in some of the blanks about what is going on here, what we're talking about.
We're talking about a website that it's called Odysee. That's the name. Not spelled the way you would think of the Greek mythology, but spelled O-D-Y-S-E-E, Odysee. And it was started by a fella named Jeremy Kaufman. You may be familiar with his name because he's the fella who, who after the debate between Harris and Trump, suggested that she should be killed.
And there'd be celebration if she was.
That's right.
Yeah,
and he is also the founder of a site called Library. And he started this site as an alternative to YouTube. And what it's done is it's attracted hundreds of far-right organizations, groups, views, so on and so forth. And it was the Southern Poverty Law Center, which basically put together a digital threat report to talk about the gravity of this group and what it means, particularly this year, as we're seeing disinformation ricocheting all over the place. And Tim here, under Jennifer McKim, who heads up our investigation unit at GBH, she worked with Tim, and Tim basically came to her with an idea to do a deep dive into Odysee, spurring as a result of the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Okay, Megan, that's your cue from the Southern Poverty Law Center. For those of us who are embarrassingly uninformed about Odysee and similar things, fill in a few blanks, if you would.
Sure, yeah, this website's been on our radar for quite some time because it basically serves as a YouTube replacement for folks whose content is so vile they've already been kicked off of that more mainstream platform. They come to sites like Odysee that serve as a replacement. So we were looking at this platform for those reasons for several years, and have reported on it a few times. Finally, my data lab got the charge to figure out exactly how much money was changing hands on this platform. And so we put out a report showing, I think we tracked several hundred of these accounts on there and calculated that they were bringing in, I think it was over $350,000 a year. Some of the folks were earning, a salary on there, over $60,000 just on that one platform, in the form of tips and donations for
and that's
producing
part, just to be
sort of
clear,
content.
that's one of the attractions to these hate groups. It's not just that there's no content moderation, but that they can make money potentially, correct?
Exactly. I mean, it's a pretty close YouTube clone. That's the idea. Just the way you can monetize your videos on YouTube by taking donations, you can do the same thing on Odysee. So they find it very lucrative.
Megan, when you talk about things being so vile on there, censorship has become a big issue in this election. Elon Musk is talking about it all the time. Of course, the guys that run X, Kamala Harris has been accused of being a big censor person in this election. What is it that is so, that you can repeat here, that is so vile on this particular website that caused it to be exiled from YouTube in the first place?
Yeah, the content creators that were kicked off of YouTube were typically that happened because they were either calling for violence or they were engaging in hate speech. So those are prohibited activities on YouTube, but they're not on Odysee. So yeah, they were denigrating people for their immutable characteristics. It's pretty basic hate speech.
Okay.
Tim Biba, one of the things I appreciate most about Philip's work, other than the fact that he's actually not a bad person, is, he's a pretty good guy.
We've heard some stories, actually.
In all seriousness, Marjorie and I talk about this all the time, almost every horrible thing that we talk about on the show people, including Marjorie and I, like to think that happens somewhere else. There's hate speech elsewhere. There's racism elsewhere. There's misogyny elsewhere. Philip has regularly brought this home. And spend a minute talking not just about this Jeremy Kaufman character, as expansively as you'd like, but there's also a private equity firm that helped bankroll the beginning of this Odysee experience, correct?
That's right, and that was made clear in court documents that I found researching Odysee. They were sued by the SEC, Jeremy Kaufman and his company were.
Based on what?
Based on failing to register the currency originally traded on the site as a cryptocurrency. And there were hundreds of documents that I read through, and they showed the business plan of the site from way back in 2016. They showed emails between Odysee staff and investors like Jamie Goldstein at Pillar VC. And so, I'm really interested in the infrastructure of radicalization and of hate. How did this website get built, and who makes money on it?
And is there a case to be made, or is it fair to make the case? Clearly, based on the documents you were able to see, the startup funding was helped out by this, what's it called, Pillar VC?
Pillar VC, yeah.
Do we have any reason to believe that their involvement continues, or no?
So it's hard to tell today, but looking back in 2020, Pillar VC, their initial funding in 2016 was about $400,000 of a $500,000 capital raise. That's the first time that Jeremy Kaufman and Pillar VC can raise money together. But we found in documents...
But Pillar VC knew that Kaufman, with his history, was involved in this.
Yeah, and it actually gets a little bit more interesting. In 2020, as Odysee kind of takes over for this company library, it's the site that we're talking about, they entered into another capital raise of between $9 and $12 million. And Pillar VC is shown in PowerPoints from the SEC's case that they're leading the charge to raise those millions of dollars. So 2020 is the closest kind of connection that we can see from these documents.
Philip, my position generally on the show is when people in positions of power, like these private equity types, refuse to answer a question from a responsible journalist, it's appropriate to conclude guilty as charged. And maybe that's my approach. Otherwise, let them defend their position. Kaufman did respond to this effort in one line, and I want to read it, and maybe you can expand upon it. Every so-called journalist at GBH Boston is as evil as a reporter at Pravda, and proper society would deport, jail, or execute them.
Yeah, that's quite the comment. And at one point, that would have been considered extreme. But on Odysee, it is par for the course. This is the type of thing you're hearing. And the reason this is so dangerous, and the reason Odysee is so dangerous, if you look just today, you have former President Trump in Aurora, Colorado, describing the city as gang-infested and taken over by gangs. Now, this is disinformation. Let's be clear, it's a lie. As much a lie as about Haitians eating pets. But this is the type of thing that is being echoed loudly on Odysee. And investment firms like Pillar, which is right down the street, by the way.
Oh, it is?
Right here on Boylston Street. Right down the street.
We should stop by, Jim, after the show.
Or they should stop by here.
Right.
Go ahead.
They seem to take no responsibility. You're right. They've been silent. And what you're seeing is what used to be considered far-right extremism has been brought into the mainstream. And the mainstreaming of far-right extremism is echoed again on Odysee by numerous sites that Megan Squire, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Tim Biba have been able to pinpoint. Hundreds of sites, including a group called the Nordic Resistance Movement, which is the United States government bans as a terrorist organization. It found a home on Odysee. And if you think about the Nordic resistance movement and you think about the terror assault that occurred in Norway years ago, for example, on an island where white supremacists killed dozens of children, this is the result of propaganda, disinformation. It's not harmless, and it's not a matter of freedom of speech.
Well, Megan, Philip just mentioned the whole pet eating, the immigrants allegedly eating pets, another J.D. Vance, Donald Trump thing, which apparently it was months ago on this site. And you do wonder where you hear these crazy things like Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Jewish lasers and the Democrats controlling the storms, the weather, able to harness the weather. This is the kind of stuff that you see in addition to going after people because they're gay or whatever, or black or whatever it is. It's those kind of weird, crazy theories.
100%. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover between what we might just call it conspiratorial thinking and more overt racism. A lot of the channels, it's 50-50 or, just a complete mix of the two types of content. That's extremely common. And I think it's not going too far to say that some of these channels take victory laps when some of their conspiracies make it into the mainstream. So these groups were very excited when the Haitians eating pets thing broke through into the mainstream. That was a big win for them when they get, name checked on national TV by.
And as well on Fox News. I mean, you heard that on Fox News. I think Sean Hannity spent some time talking about pet eating.
And I want to say, Philip touches on a really important point. Not just conspiracies, or you won't just find conspiracy theories on this site. You won't just find political rhetoric. You'll find actual manifestos of people like Anders Breivik, the Norwegian terrorist that Philip just mentioned. And that is a particularly dangerous piece of information because it's a how-to guide that has been cited by other people, like the mass shooter in New Zealand a few years ago, people like Dylan Roof. That exists on this site. So when investors say, they want to support a site that has no content moderation, that's what they're paying for, and that's what they're profiting off of.
Megan, can we talk about the law for a second without getting lost in the weeds? One of the few things, and please correct me at any point if I'm wrong, that Trump and Biden, when they ran against each other, agreed upon, even though for different reasons, was that Section 230 was a problem. And that's the section that says it's the speaker who can be held responsible, not the host, the service that hosts the hate speech or whatever kind of speech there is. Is that what protects Odysee from any
exactly
legal?
right.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's Section 230. And remember, there's two sides to Section 230. So the same law that allows them to be not held liable for the speech that users take on that platform also allows them to decide what kind of content they want to host. So it allows YouTube to set up terms of service and say that they don't want to host this kind of content. So it's sort of a double-edged, it's a two-sided statute, I guess. I wanted to touch really quickly on the point that Tim made about the manifestos too, if I could.
Please, yeah, of course.
I think that that's such an important point because we actually saw so much of that sort of content on Odysee doing this report that we followed up with our second report, which was on not manifestos, but on the terror videos that mass shooters make of their crimes. So in other words, that when they film themselves shooting up a synagogue or whatever, and posting those videos online, we actually got the idea for that project from the amount of that type of content that we saw on Odysee. So we ended up doing a follow-up report just on that.
We're going to keep.
Those, yeah,
Oh,
it's
I'm
bad.
sorry. I'm sorry. Did you
No,
want to
no.
finish before I?
No, that's good. I was
okay.
just, yeah.
I was just going to say we're going to keep talking about this after a quick break for Pledge, but we are talking with GBH's Philip Martin, Tim Biba, and Megan Squire about all this crazy stuff online, making it into the mainstream and the connections between some of it and people in Boston who fund it. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan. We're live at the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. The governor joins us next week for an hour. The attorney general joins us for an hour. Sunita Williams is going to zoom in on Wednesday from the International Space Station. But right now on planet Earth is GBH's Philip Martin, reporter Tim Biba, and Megan Squire from the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Megan, I've asked this question a million times, and Jim is sick of hearing me ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you make a big mistake in a newspaper, you get sued. You can lose a lot of money. We saw Fox News lying about the election over and over again, getting sued. I think it was 700 million or 800 million, something like that. I'm always. I think online people can. I certainly think Facebook can do a lot better job monitoring what's on there, but why does this happen? Why is this like the Wild West at these places with no kind of criminal repercussions? I don't understand it. I'm sure I'm not the only person who doesn't.
Yeah, there's been very, well, there was for a while an appetite for content moderation, but that's largely fallen off. You mentioned earlier the political climate just isn't, I don't know, it's kind of shifted, the winds are shifting. One glimmer of interesting hope maybe was the recent arrest in France of the Telegram CEO, Pavel Durov. A lot of us that watch these kind of spaces were extremely interested in that case because it represented, for the first time, really a government taking strong action against lawlessness that, like you were talking about, on a platform. And that's a very, very large platform, orders of magnitude bigger than Odysee. But a lot of us are watching that very closely to see what happens in that case. Does the platform change its
But isn't there
tune?
much tighter regulation in many Western European
European
nations
Union,
than there
yes.
is here, right?
There are, but the stuff that they were claiming that Pavel Durov was letting happen on Telegram would have been illegal anywhere.
Yeah, okay.
There was a lot of just straight up crime, child abuse material, and things like that. So that's blanket illegal. So
Tim Beaver, how big is the audience for a place like Odysee? And is there any evidence that visiting the sites cause action to be taken by those who consume them?
Megan's the expert on this, but there's between it averages out each month about 7 million people on the site in the kind of springtime, last time that I looked. That's a lot of people, and they're grouped all over the country. They're grouped in Europe. You can see through a site called SimilarWeb the traffic that Odysee gets, and it's a large amount of Americans that are on this site.
So, Megan, you were just cited again here. What's the evidence that beyond the hate speech itself, which in and of itself is problematic, is there evidence that it motivates people to do things they might not otherwise do?
absolutely. And that's one of the things that we're most concerned about, is just the general shift in tone, the attitudinal shift for the whole country, but also within each individual as they're exposed to more and more of this type of content. Their mentality changes, their attitudes change, their, I don't want to say predisposition to violence, but certainly their tolerance for violence and violent rhetoric definitely takes off. We've also seen connections to harassment, so channels and video streams that support harassing people online. The users of that they get involved in that as well.
Do you get harassed after you publish what you publish?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah,
you're
for sure.
laughing. I
I'm
assume it's
laughing
pretty
'cause there's-
scary.
I actually pulled up the chart that we made with the story just so I could, refresh myself about the numbers and everything. And right there in the middle of the chart is one of the channels that harassed us very badly after this story came out. And I had kind of forgotten about it. And then I saw the chart. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. So
I would also mention they love their name being cited, so I'm not going to cite their names. But there is a particular virulent hate group, neo-Nazi group in Massachusetts that puts all of their content on Odysee as a way of recruiting young people who might look at this and say, I want to be a part of this group.
And remember, they can make money on the site. So if you see something and you like it and you pay them, that directly funds hate in real life. It funds pamphlets and flyers and marching in the Southeast St. Patrick's Day Parade with all kinds of crazy stuff.
That's right.
Well, I hate to pick on men, but it does seem that there are lots of men between like 17 and 23 and 24 who maybe things aren't going as well as they want, and they're in their basements reading this stuff all day long, and then they wind up in the news in one of those groups that's outside Children's Hospital, which you covered so well, or in another one of these marches, or shooting at somebody.
You're spot on. I mean, it's heavily male-slanted oriented. And the same group, of course, who the far right are targeting right now. And
in the election, too.
In the election with some success. And so, Odysee has that, a lot of incels, guys who don't like women, who don't like girls, who don't like females. They are heavily populating Odysee. In various groups and various forms, including some of the groups that were cited in the report on gbh.org, if people would like to see and read the story.
So what should we be doing about this? I mean, do we call our congressman or what?
Well, I think it's important to be aware of the connection between social media in a broad sense, digital media in a broad sense, and hate on the ground.
Yeah.
When these folks march, they don't see themselves in a temporary position. The Southern Poverty Law Center, Anti-Defamation League, others have described groups that we're talking about. Some of these people see themselves as foot soldiers for a larger far-right movement. Odysee serves to amplify and echo the messages they're sending out there. Manifestos, yes. Showing what they're putting up banners over highways, condemning blacks, Jews, Palestinians, others, so on and so forth, women. You're seeing these banners. They've been, it's called banner drops. And so they have, this is a multi-pronged strategy on the part of these people. Banners, Odysee, groups like Odysee, social media sites like Odysee. How do you amplify your message? How do you basically recruit? And this is part of that strategy.
Before we say thank you to everybody, I want to repeat one thing. Down the street, the initial funders right here in Boston, Jeremy Kaufman, whose organization said if someone assassinated Harris, they'd be celebrated. And not to mention all the reporting you've done, Philip, about hate groups like this operating with impunity right here in our midst. And what you've done, all three of you, is hugely important and courageous, and we appreciate your work and appreciate your time today. So thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for being with us. We've been speaking with GBH's Philip Martin, Tim Biba, and Megan Squire.